Hello everybody, welcome back to the Pixel Therapy channel, the home of great games and even greater vibes. The people at Sector 3 have been awesome enough to been working really hard on Raceroom racing experience, and they've just launched an update for the sim. Now, Raceroom has been getting a lot of updates over the years because it is one of the older sims that is currently active, and as a legacy sim, a lot of time and care has gone into it in terms of updating the physics, and finally, they've updated the force feedback for that. So the purpose of today's video is essentially twofold. It's to compare the old force feedback based prior to the update with what the force feedback feels like post-update. So what you're going to watch is actually a series of clips that I recorded before the update, where I gave my thoughts and feelings on the force feedback as I was driving, and I also did it with my motion system on and with my motion system off. Subsequently, after the update, I then revisit the sim and then recorded more footage using the same car and the same track, again, just without the motion and with the motion. Now, the reason I did the filming in those 4 different segments is because I, one, wanted to compare what the force feedback felt like, because it was moving to a physics-based type of force feedback as opposed to the canned force feedback that Raceroom had. But what I was also curious about is, with the rewriting of the code, does the telemetry come out differently and actually affect motion? As there are quite a few people out there with motion systems, it'll be interesting to know if a developer does a force feedback change or changes the way the game outputs telemetry, does that affect a little bit more than just the force feedback feel you feel from your steering wheel? And another thing is, there is usually a marriage between the way force feedback feels and the way a motion system moves. It's about, for example, putting together the tension that you feel in the forces and aligning them with the sway that you would feel moving back and forth with the motion. So if the force feedback changes, do you then have to go back and reconfigure your motion? So this was more of also a fact-finding mission for myself to see if these two, how closely linked are these two, and if there are changes like this to a sim, do we then have to revisit it and retune our motion system? So essentially, I won't ramble much on, I will get straight to the video, but prior to doing that, to celebrate Raceroom's update and just the advancements that the sim has come across, I've put together a championship, a DTM championship. And so I'll just talk about that briefly and then we'll get straight into the video. Peace. Hello everyone, welcome to the Pixel Therapy channel. I'm pleased to announce that we are getting our very first Raceroom Racing Experience Championship. The point of this championship is to, one, celebrate the update that Raceroom has done with their amazing force feedback, but also to actually get together and race as a community and actually get to know the people who are part of the Pixel Therapy viewership. So what I've done is I've put together a championship consisting of 4 races, and we'll be racing the 2020 DTM cars. So what you guys need to do is come over here to Simracing.GP, register for Simracing.GP, and click into the Pixel Therapy community and jump in. Once you've done that, you're going to come across 2 championships. The first championship is for people within Australia and New Zealand. That championship will be starting off at 10 p.m. every Saturday New Zealand time, which is 8 p.m. Australian time. And essentially, we will be racing the 2 cars that were part of the DTM 2020 series, which is the Audi and the BMW. Also, what we will be doing is, for each of the 4 events, at the end of the 4 events, we will be giving away VRP using a lottery basis. So what that means is you don't actually have to win the race, you just have to participate. Once you participate, I will go through the participants and I will actually, using a random method, a number generator, select who I'll be giving the VRP to, and I'll be sending you VRP codes. The same thing happens for the second region. If you're not within Australia or New Zealand and you reside either in Europe and North America, I've also created a championship with the exact same events and the exact same vehicles, but more catered towards your time zone. Also within here, I will also be selecting people at random and giving away VRP to those people. So how do you get access to this? It's simple. Join the Pixel Therapy Discord channel. The Discord channel is actually linked at the top right corner of our community. So if you come in here, and at the top right corner over here, you will actually see the link to our Discord channel. There is also the link to our Discord channel at the bottom of this YouTube video. And essentially, if you jump in and you're part of the Discord, when we do make a selection for who's going to get the VRP, I'm able to send you the codes through then. So thank you very much. I hope to see you guys on track. And yeah, everybody stay safe and happy sim racing. And here we are on the force feedback screen. So a good place to start before I actually give my thoughts on this old force feedback is to look at my settings and actually see why I've set it up the way that I've set it up. So if we have a quick glance at the screen, we can tell that the force feedback is set to on, obviously. And I have my force feedback intensity at about 65%. So in my SemiCube controller, I generally like to have my force feedback at 100%. That way I get all the power I can from the wheelbase, and then I mess around with the intensity within the game software itself. I have smoothing at about 10 because Raceroom can have quite harsh force feedback, so that smooths it out. If we go to the steering force settings, I have the steering force intensity at 100%. Minimum force, I have that at 0. Understeer, I tend to have it at 100% because the moment the car starts to understeer, I want complete loss of force feedback. And then as I induce liftoff oversteer or I dab on the brakes a little bit, that force feedback slowly comes back, and then I know that I have the bite in the front tires again. With a vertical load, this to me translates as lateral load. So in other words, braking and accelerating, I normally have that at 65%. So that's how much we lose force feedback based on whether or not your tires are locking up or they're spinning out in acceleration. And 65% is not a complete loss or drop off. It gradually goes off, and that gives me more of a controlled sensation, and then I get a better idea of how much braking I'm doing into a corner, if that makes sense. And the same thing goes for the lateral load. When you're turning the car, I can sort of feel that gradual transition away to go towards an understeer position and sort of mitigate that before we completely go into an understeer. So I've got nothing. So vertical load, lateral load at 65%. Steering rack is at 0. Wheel slip, that's only at about 30%. The curb vibrations, I have them at 20. The shift effect, I have it at 10. Most of these are for immersion anyway, so they don't really have to be that high. Collision effect, if I've hit something, I can tell I've hit something. I really don't need a big shunt coming through the steering wheel. So my philosophy around force feedback, as you can tell, is more leans towards information from the wheel so I can drive, as opposed to the immersion of actually being like, oh my god, the curbs feel amazing and that sort of a thing. Now, with that being said, let's take this out for a spin and let me give you my thoughts on what the old force feedback feels like with Raceroom. So we're in here in the DTM 2020 BMW, and it's one of the run-of-the-mill cars in my mind where it's got a decent amount of downforce, and it's a fun car to drive. The track that we are on right now is Road Atlanta, and let's warm these tires up, do a lap or two, and then we can have a discussion about what the force feedback feels like. So generally, with Raceroom, the sensation that I'm getting with my force feedback, or what I look for, is information, as mentioned earlier. And with that information, like for here, after a long straight, when I start to brake gently, I want to feel it load up and then lighten up there, like what happened when I actually lost traction. So in that demonstration there, the car loaded up just a little bit, and then the moment the traction was lost, all the force feedback and the sensation went away from the wheel. And so when we come out to here, you get that. And when I turn the steering wheel, I can sort of feel the wheel load up with the lateral forces as well. So currently, the current force feedback for Raceroom has been really good at giving that information. You can get a sense of how much braking you're doing, and the moment you lock up, aside from the audio cue, you feel your wheel get light. When you turn into a corner right here, you can actually feel the forces load up, and based on how much throttle application I'm putting in, that load increases or decreases relative to how much I am actually increasing or reducing the throttle application. So essentially, I'm able to establish, after practice and going through a few laps, how hard and how fast I should be braking for whatever corner I'm doing. And then when taking a corner, I have an idea of how fast I'm meant to be going. So Raceroom has always been one of the sims that I personally have thought has got really great force feedback implementation. I understand that some of the effects within the Raceroom force feedback are canned effects. I've always understood these to be effects such as the collision and the road bumps, but that's fine, and I think that's okay for lower end wheels, because that's probably what made Raceroom feel amazing with your mid to lower tier wheels. But it's not something that I necessarily must have in a sim's force feedback. What I generally look for is information around those two main forces when braking and accelerating, and when understeer and oversteer. And then once I figure those out and map them to each corner within the sim or on a racetrack, I'm able to find time and sort of see where we're going for that. So another thing that I sort of doing laps on this track that I'm noticing about the force feedback is the surface feel isn't necessarily overly pronounced. And part of that could be the settings that I have, but it's there. You do feel the texture of the road to some extent, but it's not over the top. So for example, we just went over that little undulation coming up here. I didn't get a sense of like suspension compression as I was going up the hill, nor do I get that sense of suspension compression when I'm going down a hill and it flattens out. So sort of like this part here, we're going down, it flattens up, it goes down. It doesn't feel that different on the wheel when I'm doing it. The forces generally kick in when I'm braking, accelerating, or taking that corner and going round. So I've always loved the current force feedback with Raceroom. I guess what will be interesting to see is how this differs with the new force feedback coming out, and what it's like with Motion as well. So yeah, basically that's about it. If we're looking at force feedback for off-road surfaces, so grass, rumble strips, it's fine. So for example, if I drift off the track like that, I can definitely feel that that is a softer surface as opposed to more of the dirt over here. And you get that sensation coming from this side of the wheel, and if you can tell that yes, that is my left-hand side wheel that has gone off the surface, and that's what's actually changed. But these are all things you can see visually. You know, if you drift off the track, you can see that. So it does it well, but in my mind, it's amazing for immersion, but in my mind, it's not necessarily the most important thing, because by the time you're off the track, you can see it. I mostly focus on what force feedback feels like when I'm on the track and I'm trying to find good lap times or trying to be competitive. Right, so for that, let's see what it's like with Motion on the old physics, and see if that actually changes to when the update comes through, and what it feels like on the new physics, or it only affects the force feedback. All right, let's try it out with Motion. Peace. All right, welcome back. So now we're actually going to try the old Raceroom physics and the force feedback and telemetry. Same thing, we're going to analyze the force feedback, and we're going to analyze what it feels like with a motion system currently. So essentially, I am not going to necessarily show my motion system settings, because I feel that each motion rig is different and the software that's used is different. But at least let's have a discussion of what driving feels like with that, and see if there's a change between now and when we actually implement the update. So we're going to start off from the pits again. And again, we're going to focus on acceleration, deceleration, and what it feels like going through the corners. So off the bat, with the motion system already, when you start to accelerate, you can actually feel the weight transfer moving backwards. One thing that I mentioned earlier on when we're just using the force feedback as it is without motion was that the surface texture wasn't necessarily coming through. It is now. So as I drive along, I can actually sort of feel the undulations on the road a little bit. The gear shifts are a lot more punchy. So in other words, the telemetry around gear shifting is coming through, but by not having it through the wheel, because I think I only have it at 10% with my settings. I don't want it coming through the wheel. By not having it through the wheel and having it come through the motion system instead, the wheel isn't clipping. It's still able to give me the information that I require to know exactly what the forces are going through. So it's kind of like divide and conquer between the motion system and the force feedback wheel itself. These little dips in the undulation that I was talking about, you can actually feel them now as you slowly feel the actuators rise and fall with the pitch of the motion system. Now, what's really a game changer for me is this. It's when you go around a prolonged corner. When you take a prolonged corner like that, the yaw effect, or actually the sway effect rather, not the yaw, kicks in and you feel your weight transfer going to the opposite direction. But it's married to that force feedback intensity. So you remember how I had the lateral load at 65% when we're starting to understeer? As that happens and you're sort of feathering the throttle and you feel that bite change in your force feedback wheel, the intensity at which you are leaning in the motion system also responds. And you get this marriage of like force feedback sensation with like weight transfer in your body through the motion system. And when we come up here, you don't necessarily feel the load in your steering wheel as much, but you definitely feel the pitch kicking in to, with your motion system, if that makes sense. So I'll be really curious to see if this still works well after the update, because right now it feels amazing. Raceroom in its current state, or its old state now, has got some of the best motion system incorporation ever. And I mean, your mileage will vary based on what software and what type of motion system you're using, but on an actual based system using the Simracing Studio software, it's amazing. So when you do this, clearly you can sort of feel the weight transfer shift forward, and then here the sway kicks in, and then you get the rumble strips coming through both the wheel and the actuators. It's just, yeah, it's amazing. It's a game changer. So I think I'll leave it at that right now. And I guess I'll give the Raceroom, the old Raceroom force feedback, say a solid 8 out of 10. And then when incorporated with motion, it goes up to like a 9 out of 10 in my opinion. And I'll be curious to see what it feels like after the update, and whether it's a step forward or I guess it's a step in the wrong direction. So we'll end the video there, and then next time we'll do this, it will be with an updated version of Raceroom, and I'll give you guys my thoughts. And then finally, we will end with my final thoughts. So thanks very much for that, and I will see you in a bit. Peace. And welcome back, guys. So it's been a few hours. We've done the update. I've had a change of clothes, and we're going to jump in and see what the new force feedback feels like after this update. So essentially, the first thing you'll see when you jump in is the slick new UI. It's got a very dark mode feel to it, and it's quite simplistic. Another thing that I noticed when I hit drive was my field of view was different, and I actually had to set it up in here. So if we jump in here, I'll show you what that looks like. So if you go into your options settings and you come in here and you go under field of view, you'll notice that you get this snazzy graphic here, this UI graphic where you've got your little car and you can put in your screen size, the distance from your screen, as well as your height offset. However, If you want something a little more clear and representative, if you go into the enter calibration mode, you're able to actually see what it would look like with these control settings still there. And then over here, you can adjust your seat and move it further and back and see how it looks. So I've done that. Another thing that I did was I went into the force feedback because that needs to be updated. And the first thing that's going to strike you is how minimal it is. So like I explained in the first video when we were looking at the old force feedback, is that a lot of the effects that came through were actually canned effects. And so essentially with this new system, it's based off the physics of the sim and what's happening with the car. So in prior updates, Sector 3 have pretty much been putting in a lot of effort and updating the physics of their cars, but a lot of that was getting lost in the force feedback because it was based off canned effects. However, this should come through now. So there's less to it. However, they give you a little recommendation here, and it's based upon how strong your wheel is. So I have a 20 Newton meter small midge direct drive wheel, and essentially it says that anything that's over 10 Newton meters, you really want your torque wheel to be less than 100%. So I've already had a play with the force feedback, and I have mine at 100%, and I'll let you know why. With each car, you get a force feedback multiplier, right? And you can turn that down or you can crank it all the way up. So they recommend for a wheel at my level, it should be less than 100. I've tried it out with mine. 100 is fine. With the force feedback linearity, they say that if your wheel is more than 5 Newton meters, you really want it at 100%, and that's what I've done. Minimum force is at 0 based on their recommendations. Maximum force is at 100. What this does here is it determines at what level the sim starts to clip your signal. So in my case, because I have a wheel with a lot more torque to it, I've basically put it at 100%. So you'll notice if I bring this down, the little graph over there, the ceiling drops. So I've got it all the way back up. And then down here is where you get sort of like your immersion information, such as your bump application and your gear shifts. I've got a motion rig that I generally use, so I'll get my gear shifts coming in through then. The bump application, again, the actuators will do most of that work. So I really don't want that much. I only have it at 15% so that it sort of comes through the wheel as the actuators work, and the same thing with the gear shifts. So with that being said, let's jump in and have a race, not a race rather, a few laps and see what I think of the new force feedback. So we're back at Road America, and we're in the same 2020 BMW DTM car. So off the bat, let's let the tires warm up first before. Okay. So off the bat, this force feedback signal is less punchy, if that makes sense. It's almost as though because the effects were canned before, they were very not aggressive, but they were very in your face, very pronounced is probably the best word to put it. Whereas here, the force feedback is more refined. It's still the same physics, you know, so I can still feel that lateral load when I'm going around this corner. As I feather the throttle, I can feel that subtle change between understeer, oversteer, within the lateral. That's all still there, but it's just more chilled out. All right, let's see what a heavy braking zone feels like. That especially. Okay, so braking, the variance in the load in the wheel when you're entering a heavy braking zone is a lot more subtle. It's there, it's still there, but it's definitely more subtle. Okay, I don't feel the suspension loading up coming up that hill. I didn't before, but I can definitely feel the road surface. That's still there. Let's go on the grass. Yes, so the grass is not as, again, pronounced coming through the wheel. But some of that could be the fact that I only have the road bump setting to like 15%. If I increase that, maybe more of it will come through. But that's not, again, that's not what's important to me when it comes to force feedback. It's this sensation here when you're braking, when you're turning in, and when you're powering out. And all of that is there. It doesn't feel different. It still feels very much like Raceroom, but more refined. It's almost like before it was an obnoxious 15-year-old who wanted to be loud on the bus and to be noticed by everybody. And it is now grown up and it's become, you know, a confident 25, 30-year-old man. Still the same personality, still the same person, but just chilled out. Still gets the stuff done. You still know what's going on, but it's just a little more chilled out. Oh, I could work with this. I could very much see myself getting used to this. And the thing is, I've only done, oh, like there. That is beautiful. So I locked up my tires, it went away, it came back and it bit. And that was, yeah, that's still there. So that information is coming through. So if you liked Raceroom before, I think you'll be fine. You're still going to like it. It still feels like Raceroom. If you didn't like Raceroom, I guess maybe the question would be why. If it was because the force feedback felt a little weird, then maybe I'd say try it out again because it's a little more refined. So I think before I gave the old force feedback maybe a, I think it was an 8 or an 8.5. I might bring the old force feedback down to like a 7 or 7.5 now, and then say that this new updated force feedback is probably within the 8.5 mark. 9s and 10s are really hard to get with me, guys. But yeah, I really like it. What I'm curious about now is to see how it translates to different cars, such as Formula cars. Is there a noticeable difference with the downforce and how that loads up? That would be cool to sort of check out. But the reason I stuck to this car is that's the car that we used to test before. And generally that should be enough to let you know what the differences are. Same track, same layout, same car, same conditions. Now this is cool, guys. This is yes, this is pretty cool. Yeah, the longitudinal braking is it's a lot more subtle. I would probably say if they could pronounce a sensation, I would want that to be pronounced a little more. Just a little more. It's there. It is still there. I can feel it, but I'm looking for it. Especially if you're not using a motion rig that leans you in and your body can then use that cue to realize how much you're braking. Getting more of that longitudinal braking coming through the wheel would be awesome. Now this is good force feedback. It really is. I like it. I really do. All right, let's try this again, but let's try it with motion and see how we go. All right, I'll see you soon. Right, so here we are back in Raceroom. We've got the motion rig fired up, and essentially, this is the thing. This is more of an experiment for myself in that I know the physics in Raceroom was updated a while ago and has been done through previous updates. What really has gotten the change in this update is the force feedback. So I guess the way the force feedback is sent through the wheel. So I want to know if that code only applies to a steering wheel, or it also affects the way the telemetry is sent out to the motion rig as well. So essentially, I had the motion working in a way in which I enjoyed it with the old prior to the update, and I kind of want to see if with those same settings it still feels as good with the new update. So again, we are still in the DTM 2020 car. We're still at Road America. We're gonna jump in, and I think one thing that I really pointed out was the fact that the braking sensation had changed. It wasn't as amplified. So that's something that hopefully it still feels amazing with the current motion settings that I have. And it won't be an issue as much anyways, because I'll be getting that sensation from the motion rig. It'll probably help if I don't spin the car out like that. So we'll return to the garage. So yeah, gently leaving the pits. All right, let's see how this feels. All right, so already when you come into the braking, I don't notice the absence of that force feedback sensation because my body has already focused on the more prominent cue, which would be the motion pitch going forward when you're in the braking zone. Nah, this is fantastic. It works. It works. And I actually think I'm going to argue and say that Raceroom is a very, very underrated sim. It's a sim that I would argue rivals some of the more popular sims at the moment in terms of the feel and the information you get from the force feedback. Also, just the variety. Like, Raceroom is the only sim that I know that has the DTM vehicles. And I know that DTM has changed and they've moved to GT3 cars this year, but the all previous content was unique and they had that content. Yeah, the motion's the same. The two still work hand in hand. Now this is good. Look, final thoughts. I won't drag this video out much longer than it needs to be. The new force feedback, the new UI, it looks slick. The force feedback feels amazing. It's subtle. So if you're a person who really likes punchy force feedback, yeah, but that's the thing though, it's like, it's more subtle, but it's not like it's not there. You can still feel it. It is still there. So if you like Raceroom, you're gonna like this. If you didn't like Raceroom, I think it's enough. Like, if your issue with Raceroom before what had to do with force feedback, I think it's worth a visit. If it was physics and handling, then maybe that update was already, or that issue was resolved with the prior updates. But I would argue that you should check it out and try some races and see how we go. Yeah, final verdicts. I think this is cool. I enjoy racing it. I think you guys should race it as well. And that's about it. I don't have any much more to say. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. I'm going to continue doing laps. And you guys look after yourselves. Like and share if you like it. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.